A top Biden official has just been caught lying on national television. CNN has already called out the president for lying to the American people, and this is a news outlet that generally tries to defend him anytime that they can. President Joe Biden claimed for the first time within a week that he inherited a crumbling economy when he first took office, that Donald Trump left a mess, especially with inflation. President Joe Biden claims that the inflation rate was 9% when he began his presidency. But again, he said it twice in around 7 days. This means he really believes this lie himself. And here's the thing, guys. The White House economic advisor, Jared Bernstein, he was on Fox to try and defend the president's comments. And, well, the problem is that it's hard to refute something that's just so blatantly false. To make matters worse, the president wants the American people to believe that inflation was already hot before his term, that Donald Trump created this mess that we're in with our economy right now. However, the numbers do not match up at all. Check out this heated conversation where Bernstein was struggling to defend Biden.
He's making the point that the factors that caused inflation to climb to 9% were in place when he took office.
No,
I think
that's
it was
not what he said. He said it was at 9%. It would eventually get to 9% a little over a year after that. But the fact of the matter is it wasn't 9%. So if I can't trust him quoting data in real time, why should I believe what he's talking about now?
So the annual growth in core inflation in the second quarter of 21 was, in fact, about 9%. And his point about inflation down 60% off its peak is very much the case. So
no, it wasn't. It was not. It was not at that. So you're almost as bad as he is. Why can't you just say it was high? It got as high as 9%. You'd be accurate in saying that. And we have now brought it down, and we're struggling in around the 3% area. But it's better than it was. But instead, to hang it on his predecessor, that you inherited something that was through the roof when we were in the middle of COVID. It just seems to the American people, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you're lying. Neil. You're just lying.
Well, hold on. I hear you. The president was making the point that I think is unequivocally true. The factors that took inflation to 9% were in place when he took office.
That is not what he said, Jared. And you're a very smart guy with this stuff. You could just whisper, and he's a good friend of yours, obviously, thinks the world of you. Many others do as well. You could have just told him, Chief, I got to tell you, Mr. President, whatever you say, you might even, in fact, call him Joe. That's how close you are. Say, sir, it was not 9%. Stop it with the 9%, because the more you say that, the more people don't believe what you're saying.
Look, I think what the American people care most about is the fact that inflation.
The American people care about truth, Jared.
Hold on, Neil. This only works if you let me talk, okay?
You haven't answered my question. I've asked it 5 times, five ways.
The president was making the point that the factors that caused inflation were in place when he took office, and that's unequivocally true. Right. I take your point, and we can have we can go on all day back and forth on this.
Now, I don't want to run the entire thing because Bernstein basically just repeats himself over and over and doesn't actually address the question. He also talks about lowering costs for Americans. Do you feel this change with your expenses? Now, do you know what's the worst thing about these lies? To keep it going, liars have to keep lying, and that's what we saw here. A top White House advisor trying to twist and turn the words coming from the president. And to add insult to injury, even CNN is fact-checking them. Now, just to clarify, inflation was at 1.4% when Donald Trump left it to President Biden.
In reality, inflation in January of 2021 was 1.4%. As of this month, prices have increased 20% since then. By one estimate, listen to this, the average U.S. household has to spend an additional $1,074 every month to keep up the same standard of living they had when President Biden took office. The numbers don't lie, and neither do the American people. They know nonsense when they hear it. A 32-year-old engineer from Nevada who voted for the president in 2020 told reporters he's frustrated with the way the White House frames the economy. Here's what he had to say. It's concerning to me when I keep seeing press come out of the White House where they keep saying the economy is good. That's really weird, because I'm paying more on taxes more on groceries, more on housing, and more on fuel. So that doesn't feel good. Small business owners in particular have been hard hit by increased prices. They have smaller margins to absorb the increased costs for materials, labor, and other operating expense. And they risk losing customers every time they raise their prices.
Which is why experts are confused with these recent remarks from the president. He's not just touting that he's brought down inflation that he inherited from Donald Trump. He's saying that no other president has created more jobs than him. But here's the problem with this concept. The idea is that he, quote unquote, created millions of jobs. But he failed to acknowledge that these jobs were lost during the pandemic. So these jobs were actually under the Trump administration. This has led many critics to believe that President Biden is doing this for a reason. He knows that Americans are unhappy with Bidenomics. He understands that many of us are struggling. But instead of curbing the government spending, he instead tries to change the narrative. And there's one constant thing that he does try to do. He tries to blame Donald Trump for everything. But the reality is that our economy under President Joe Biden is being seen as one of the top concerns from voters for this year's elections. Now, the bad news is that the polls are already showing what people really think about President Joe Biden's policies, especially when we talk about just how much money he spent on different conflicts around the world. Now, speaking of, more Americans are now reminiscing about the good old days. Before the pandemic, our economy was doing well under Trump. One of the reasons touted by supporters is the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. This was enacted under the former president, and it included lower tax brackets, a higher standard deduction, and a boost to the child tax credit. Provisions that are now in danger of expiring, as it looks like the Biden administration has no plans of extending them past 2025. While that decision may change, it's still uncertain given the changes that might happen within the White House and Congress. Economists argue that this bill enormously helps individual taxpayers, especially with lower rates and wider brackets. But this reminds me of something that the U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen had said earlier this year. She says that the difference in Donald Trump and President Joe Biden's economic policies are night and day. She says that President Biden's approach has produced the fairest recovery on record and will benefit the middle class, because that's what the White House is all about, right? To help lower and middle class Americans with their expenses. But if we fast forward to just a little over half a year, and voters are making their voices heard through the polls. The economy, much like the U.S.-Mexico border, they are the two biggest concerns for voters, both of which are being highlighted as we're just a few months away from the 2024 presidential elections. And now, more people believe that Donald Trump is the answer to these problems. Do you agree with him? Or do you guys think that President Biden can still turn this all around? While not everyone will have the same solution, most people agree that Biden is part of the problem. But as always, you guys are free to your own opinions. All I'm here to do is to inform you of the truth. Before I go, I just want to thank you for your time. Keep safe, and I'll see you on the next one.